This is Stars, a short story written by myself. Virgil was never one for surprises, so when a cloth slipped down over his eyes, his first instinct was to go into fight or flight. He had sent his arms flying, aimed for anything and anyone, though Logan's voice quickly brought him to a stop. It had taken a few minutes to explain, though Virgil soon learned that the blindfold was not the result of a cruel attack, but was merely from his boyfriend trying to surprise him. Of course, no matter how many times he had apologized for reacting so hastily, Logan brushed it off, claiming he had not been hit and was therefore all right. Now, Virgil was carefully being led who knows where, all of his trust placed into the hands guiding him forward. He attempted several times to lift the blindfold, less to actually see and more just to bother Logan, who swatted his hands away every time he did so. Virgil had to stifle a laugh at Logan's determination. Though he wasn't able to see it, he was about 90% certain that wherever he was going had to have taken weeks of planning to finalize. Virgil wasn't a plan of spontaneous events, Logan even more so, which was exactly why Virgil could barely contain his anticipation of what the professor had come up with. He felt very thankful for the blanket he had kept wrapped around his shoulders as the outdoor chill brushed past his cheeks. 2 hands rested softly on his shoulders, gently guiding him into what Virgil assumed was Logan's car. It had to be, as Virgil's didn't carry the distinct smell of peppermints and lavender. The car began to vibrate softly as Logan turned the key, sending jazz tunes drifting through the radio. In an attempt to guess where they were going, Virgil began to count the minutes. He should be able to narrow his options down to a 5-mile radius, right? There was a soft snickering coming from his left, and he turned towards Logan with a smirk. "What?" "I know what you're doing," Logan said, amusement shining in his voice. "That's not going to work, as one's concept of time can easily become inaccurate." "Well, excuse me for trying to make sense of your impromptu improvisation." "Firstly, big words are my expertise, and secondly, I was trying something different in hopes you would find it more exciting." "Anything you come up with is exciting, Lo." Virgil smiled, reaching out to hold the professor's hand, though having great difficulty as he still could not see. He heard Logan sigh before soft fingers intertwined with his own. "As you say so often, you are acting quite sappy." "It's justified, as you are simply too endearing. Now, can I take this thing off? We've got to be getting close to wherever we're going." "Just a few more minutes." Virgil could feel Logan rolling his eyes. "I swear you have 0 patience." "Of course I do. I've waited this long, haven't I?" Logan snorted, and Virgil squeezed his hand in response. The soft hum of the car mixed with Horace Silver's Song for My Father filled Virgil's head, and he found himself sighing with content. Slowly, the car pattered to a stop, and Virgil protested as Logan's hand slipped from his own. "I'll be right back," Logan chuckled. "You don't have to look at me like that." Virgil tried to deepen his frown, but could not keep a straight face. He ended up laughing to himself before the click of the passenger door opening caught his attention. Stepping out into the open air, he felt a brisk wind graze his skin again. Who decided that cold should qualify as a temperature? Virgil pulled his blanket closer, hesitantly following as Logan led him forward. His feet met soft ground, either grass or some weird kind of sponge plant, he thought. His first guess had been correct, coming to brush at his ankles while Logan carefully lowered him into a sitting position. Virgil raised his hands to the blindfold once more, barely tugging at the soft fabric. "Hang on," Logan scolded, swiping his hands away. "It's almost time." "You're just doing this to spite me now." Logan chuckled, and Virgil felt his heart swell. "Maybe a little. Here, just give me a second." Gentle hands came to rest upon Virgil's temples, pulling the cloth away from his eyes. He blinked, adjusting to the sudden absence of darkness, then gasped. Millions of stars shone up above, reflected by a perfect navy sky. One could never see things such as this within the city due to the high amounts of light pollution. Logan must have spent ages trying to find a spot devoid of enough electricity. Virgil found himself gawking at the night sky, unable to look away. "Logan, this is—" "I'm sorry," Logan interrupted. "I didn't know if you would enjoy it, so I just assumed, but obviously it's quite a stretch. If it's not to your liking, we can go somewhere else." "What are you talking about?" "I thought you don't?" Virgil rolled his eyes. "Logan, I love it. I was trying to say this is incredible before you decided to interrupt." Oh," Logan sputtered. "I'm glad you like it then." A red flush crept across the professor's cheeks, and Virgil practically melted at the sight. He grinned, admiring how stupidly adorable his boyfriend could be, then leaned back to gaze at the stars. They shone bright as diamonds, speckling the night in one bedazzled painting. Virgil looked to his side to see Logan still standing, and felt the corners of his lips turn up. "It's too late to be standing. Come here, you nerd." With a soft jerk, he pulled the professor down to his side and leaned his head onto his shoulder. Logan sighed, and Virgil flashed him a defiant smirk. "It's amusing that I used to believe that you were the independent one." "The rules don't apply when I am in the presence of your enchanted self," Virgil mumbled, resting his head on Logan's shoulder. "Careful, you're starting to sound like Roman." "Never in 1,000 years, Virgil said, smirking at the mention of their dramatic friend. He settled into Logan's side, listening intently as the professor began to point out several constellations. It fascinated him how there were so many, each with its own spectacular origin. Auriga was by far his favorite, though it was hard to choose from the millions of twinkling lights. The low hum of Logan's voice was comforting, and before he knew it, Virgil found himself enamored with everything around him. The slight tremble in Logan's shoulders brought him back to reality. He slowly lifted his head, shaking off the comfortable drowsiness that had settled in his form. Logan gave him a questioning look, as if he was oblivious to the change, though Virgil saw straight through his facade. "You all right, Lo?" "Of course, dearest." Virgil narrowed his eyes suspiciously, searching for anything out of the ordinary. It happened so quickly that Virgil nearly missed it, but he caught sight of the slight shaking in Logan's form. Are you cold, Logan?" "Of course not." The professor's eyes drifted to the right, something he always did when lying. Virgil hummed softly. "You know I don't believe you for a second." "I am quite all right, Virgil, honestly." "We can go home if you need. You look like you're freezing." "No, stay, please." Logan tugged on the sleeve of Virgil's hoodie. "I don't want us to have to leave because of me." He shot Virgil a pleading look, and seriously, how could he say no to a face like that? "You're telling me that nothing I can say will change your mind?" Logan shook his head. Virgil sighed, a smirk settling on his face. "Come here then, Starlight. I'm not going to let you freeze." He reached out a hand, wrapping it around Logan's shoulder and pulling him close. In one swift motion, he swung his blanket into the air so that it settled around the two of them. The tips of Logan's ears flushed a brilliant pink, leaving a hot blush equally creeping across Virgil's face. "Can I hear about the stars again?" he whispered, leaning his head onto Logan's shoulder. "Well, Orion represents the hunter and contains 2 of the 10 brightest stars in the sky." Logan continued on quietly, rubbing his thumb over the back of Virgil's palm with each word. Drowsiness tugged at Virgil's features, and he felt his eyes fluttering closed. The professor's voice transitioned into a distant murmur, then eventually stopped. Some distant part of Virgil's mind knew he was on the brink of slumber, and he continued to flow through the dreamless space. Half consciously, he felt the presence of Logan leaning down to meet his eye level, and the gentle brush of his lips upon Virgil's forehead. From that point, Virgil couldn't stop smiling. Out of all the world's surprises, this had been his favorite. This has been Stars, a short story written by myself. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.